Hi, my name's Kevin Hicks. Welcome to the History Squad. Now, we've been very busy. We've put together a compilation of some of our earlier videos. They include John Babbacome Lee, the man they couldn't hang. Also, the Japanese gentleman who survived both the atomic bombings of Nagasaki and Hiroshima. But we're going to start with one of the most strangest stories you'll have ever heard. This is Catherine Hayes, the tale of how she and her two lovers murdered most horrendously her poor husband. Today's video is about Catherine Hayes and her involvement in the grisly axe murder plot against her husband. She was in fact found guilty of murdering her husband, but in those days it was called petty treason. Now, you've got to understand, way back in history, in law, a man's life was considered more valuable than a woman's life. Now, petty treason, I've got it written down here. It's when a master is murdered by his servant. Petty treason. A husband murdered by his wife, which is this case. And then an ecclesiastical senior murdered by his subordinate. And there's a piece here, it says, petty treason is an assault on the majesty of state, therefore more serious than ordinary murder. Do you know it was up until 1793 that a woman could be burned alive at the stake for petty treason? Poor Catherine, she will come to a fiery end. So, Catherine Hayes, born 1690 to a wayward mother just outside of Birmingham. Her maiden name was Hall, so it's Catherine Hall. Now, at the age of 15, this rather attractive, voluptuous young lady ran away from home. She has it on her toes. She makes a living as a prostitute, but is picked up by a group of army officers who persuade her to go back with them to their barracks at Ombersley in Worcestershire, where she performs favours for them and does the odd job of cleaning and that kind of thing. But when those officers are tired of her, they kick her out. Now, she makes her way back to her native Warwickshire, where she causes quite a stir, but at the age of 23, things change for her. She is employed as a housemaid by a gentleman farmer by the name of Hayes. So our gentleman farmer, Mr. Hayes, had actually employed Catherine against the wishes of his wife. She'd obviously noticed something about this wayward young lady. Now, the Hayes had two sons, the oldest being John, who was very quickly seduced and fell under the spell of Catherine. They were married in secret, totally against the wishes of John's parents, but they lived on the farm. Now, poor old John, who was working very hard, could not fulfill the sexual desires of Catherine, and she very quickly began a series of affairs. The marriage deteriorates, but she manages to persuade John to move to London, 1719. Now, at this time, John's father, the gentleman father, had actually passed away and left him a sum of money. But John was a clever chap, and he made a business in London, a successful business, both as coal merchant, pawnbroker, and money lender. Now, they were doing very, very well in London, and Catherine was given an allowance. She had servants, so she had a pretty good life, but she wasn't satisfied. She wanted more, and there was constant arguments. Now, Catherine fell out with all of her neighbours. So this kind of leans a little bit towards what her character was really like, because she persuaded her husband to move to another neighbourhood. In fact, they moved twice. They ended up in Oxford Street. But he, being very successful, she demanding more, when it broke out into a violent argument. As a result, John reduces Catherine's allowance. She is furious, and there is fisticuffs. But things settle down, and Catherine persuades John to bring down a lodger from Worcestershire, Thomas Billings. He happens to be Catherine's son, and she now seduces him. She has an incestuous affair. Now, to cap this, another lodger is brought down. It's actually a friend of John's, Thomas Wood. And would you believe it, in no time at all, Thomas is seduced by Catherine, and she is having an affair with not only her son, but also Thomas, the other lodger. It was obvious that Catherine no longer had feelings for her husband, John Hayes, and she told her lovers, the two lodgers, don't forget that Billings was her son, of how he mistreated her, how mean he was to her, and also that he was an atheist and he'd murdered two of their babies and buried one under an apple tree and the other under a pear tree. She also promised that if they could do the deed, kill him, they would have part of her inheritance, £1,500, a considerable sum in those days. So they plot the death of John Hayes. They're going to get him drunk and then they will kill him. And it happened on the 1st of March 1726, when the two lodgers, drinking heartily with John, persuaded him that they could outdrink him, but John says, no, I can outdrink you. Extra money was spent. I think a guinea had been spent on the amount of booze so far, and then extra was brought in, and when poor old John Hayes staggered and fell on the bed, unconscious, drunk, he was attacked. He was hit over the head with an axe. He screamed out, so he was hit again until his skull was bashed in. John Hayes is dead. Now, not everything went according to plan with regards to the murder. As they'd hit John over the head, he'd screamed out and his feet had thumped on the floor, awakening the lodger, the old lady who lived in the room above them, and Mrs. Springate. She came down. What's going on? What's all the noise? Why have you woken me up? Now, Catherine persuades Mrs. Springate that they were just having a drunken party and they will now be quiet. Catherine fetches a box for the body of John, but they decide that they're going to decapitate him first, dispose of the head separately, so nobody can identify, nobody can link the head to the body. The body is going to be placed in the box. Then they find that the box isn't big enough. Don't forget, these three, Catherine and the two Thomases, her lovers, are drunk. So they cut the body into four. Thomas Wood was said to be a butcher, but this is refuted later on by another story. However, they hack the body into bits, put it in the box, the head put into a bag, the bag is put into a bucket, and off the two drunken lovers go. Ha ha! They're not lovers to each other. They're Catherine's lovers, just to clarify that one. Now, what they should have done was gone further downstream, but it was the City of London. The gates were closed. They couldn't get out. So they decide they're going to just drop the head into the River Thames near Westminster. They drop it in just as the tide is coming in, not going out. The body is dumped simply in a nearby pond and will be found later on. The head will be very quickly recovered. Some watchmen saw two ruffians dump it in the river. When it's recovered, they're going to identify it. But how they identify it is absolutely amazing. So how do you identify a severed head at the beginning of the 1700s? No DNA testing, no blood grouping, no photographs that can be published in newspapers. So what you do is you get the head, stick it on a wooden spike and display it in public and say, does anybody know who this head belongs to? It was St Margaret's Church in Westminster, in their churchyard, that they displayed it, and sure enough, several people did recognise it as being the head of John Hayes. One of the men was a Mr Ashby, a business partner of John. He immediately goes to John's lodgings and confronts Catherine. What's happened to John? Oh, he got into a terrible fight. She spins a yarn. He's had to leave the country. He's had to run. One version is that he's away on business, but actually Mr Ashby was having none of it, and he reports the whole business. He returns to the lodgings with several constables, and as they burst in, they find Catherine in bed with Thomas Billings. Don't forget that lodger who was her son and her lover, that incestuous affair. They are immediately arrested. Now, Thomas Wood is away from town on business, but he is arrested later on. The coroner's court was convened on the 16th of April 1726, and the death of poor John Hayes was ruled as willful murder, with the prime suspects being Catherine Hayes, Thomas Billings and Thomas Wood. When the news broke of this terrible attack, this savage murder, it caused a sensation, and people were waiting for the trial to begin. Interestingly, shortly after the arrest of Catherine, she was questioned by magistrates. She was taken from Newgate Prison down to the magistrates, and there was shown the head, the severed head of her husband, which had been preserved in cheap gin in a glass jar and was kept by a barber surgeon. It was presented to her and she goes, "Oh my goodness me, my poor husband. Yes, that's my husband's head." Now, to make a better identification, the head was taken out of the glass jar, whereupon Catherine grabs the head, clasps it to her bosom, and then kisses the head. But the magistrates are having none of this. Even though she is professing her innocence, they believe that she is guilty, and she is indicted for petty treason. Now, I've got the indictment here, the actual words. Catherine Hayes is indicted for petty treason in being traitorously present, comforting and maintaining the said Thomas Billings in the murder of the said John Hayes, her husband. She will now go for trial together with her two lovers. The trial took place in the April sessions of the Old Bailey from Wednesday the 20th of April to Saturday the 23rd of April 1726. This is such a sensational trial, so important that it's presided over by the Lord Mayor of London, a recorder and several judges, as well, of course, of the jury of 12 men, trusted and true. This will be a sensation. During the trial, Catherine maintained her innocent stance. "I didn't kill them. I only held the candle. We were possessed by the devil," and even maintains that her husband was a bit of a nasty man. But she was found guilty, petty treason, and her co-conspirators, Thomas Billings and Thomas Wood, were found guilty of ordinary murder. Now, the two men will be hanged at Tyburn, and then their dead bodies will be chained and gibbeted and displayed in public until they rot. But Catherine, petty treason, will be dragged from Newgate Prison to Tyburn, about 3 miles, on a hurdle. People can throw things at her, spit at her, until she arrives. There she will be chained to a post and burned alive. On hearing this sentence, she, as well as the two Thomases, were horrified. They wanted a more lenient sentence. But because of the severity of the murder, no leniency would be shown. At the end of the April sessions at the Old Bailey in 1726, 15 individuals had been sentenced to death. Now, if you look back at that time, there were 200 crimes on the books that carried the death penalty, which for me is horrendous. But out of those 15, 4 had their sentence commuted from the death penalty to transportation. For some, it will mean certain death on the voyage. Now, before the execution can take place, they're all going to be executed on the same day. Thomas Wood dies in Newgate Prison of prison fever, typhus, basically. So that leaves 9 men who are going to be hanged, and Catherine, who is going to be burned alive. Now, a lot of the information we have about Catherine Hayes when she was in Newgate Prison comes from the ordinary James Guthrie. Now, the ordinary is in fact the prison chaplain. Ordinary comes from the fact that he was ordained, and this is the chap who will take the confessions of the condemned and in fact escort them to their place of execution and will give them their last sermon as they are executed. Now, he took the confession of Catherine Hayes, during which she tells who the father of Thomas Billings actually was. She stated that it was the gentleman farmer Hayes. Therefore, Thomas Billings killed his half-brother. This is such a sordid and twisted tale. The night before the execution, the condemned were gathered together in the prison chapel and sat around a table. In the middle of the table was a coffin draped in black cloth. and the prison ordinary will give them a sermon. He will lambast them. He will be quite severe. You see, it's a show because the general public could pay a fee and come and watch the proceedings. And people would stare into the faces of the condemned because they wanted to see the horror on their faces. The public could even pay a turnkey to go and peek through the opening of the door of the condemned cells. This shows you what people were like in those days. The execution took place on the 9th of May 1726, and it's interesting the rituals that went on, bells that were rung and that kind of thing. But the condemned to be hung were taken out of their chains and the noose and rope were placed around their neck. Now in threes they sat on a coffin on each of their wagons with the ordinary giving his sermon. However, Catherine was fastened to what they call a hurdle, a kind of a gate, and she will be dragged through the street behind the parade of those who are going to be hanged. What happens is the wagons turn around when they arrive at Tyburn. They back up underneath the scaffold. The ropes are thrown over the top and the horses are then whipped and they pull away, and the three men dance the Tyburn jig. So when all 9 are done, Catherine has watched them all from her hurdle. She has watched the hanging, the killing of her own son, who she must have loved dearly. Catherine is now taken from the hurdle. She must have been in a right state. She's taken to the post where she's fastened with an iron collar around her throat and then a chain around her waist. Faggots of wood are put up against her feet, and then a noose is passed over her head and then thread through a hole in the actual post. So Arnett is going to strangle her. The fire is set, the flames leap up, she begins to shriek, the public are watching. There's a grandstand that's actually been built so people can get a good view. As Arnett picks up the rope to strangle her, the wind blows the flames against him. He drops the rope, he can't strangle her. She is screaming out loud as the flames are reaching round her legs. She's trying to kick away the faggots of wood. Arnett, in desperation now at what is happening, he throws a lump of wood against their head, and apparently this bashes out her brains. Meanwhile, the grandstand collapses. 2 people are killed, many are injured. And I forgot to mention, 2 of the highwaymen who are going to be hanged tried to escape, but they were recaptured. Richard Arnett was not having a good day. Catherine Hayes burnt to ashes. There was nothing left at all, and her son and lover, Thomas Billings, hung in chains in a gibbet till he rotted away. She must have been quite a girl, Catherine, but she always wanted more. And when it came to the murder of her husband, she thought she could get away with it, except for one vital piece of evidence: the severed head of John Hayes. As soon as it's identified, she is done. And yet, if it had been disposed of correctly and been washed out to sea, nobody would have been any the wiser. This is the story about John Lee, John Babbacome Lee, the man who couldn't be hanged. Now, I first heard about this as a young teenager listening to the folk rock group Fairport Convention, because they did a whole album about John Lee. And so I've known about it. I've been to Babbacome. It's down in Devon, now a suburb of Torquay, I understand. But it all begins with a murder. The murder victim, Miss Emma Keyes, lived in the most beautiful house right on the waterfront at Babbacome Bay, the Glen. It was a thatched house. I've seen a photograph of it, absolutely beautiful. Now, she was a dour kind of a lady, a bit religious, well-to-do though, I'm sure, because she had servants. She had John Lee, was nominally called her butler. There was a cook, Elizabeth Harris, that's John Lee's half-sister, and then Eliza and Jane Neck, who were her lady servants. So she quite well-to-do to have those. She was in dispute with the local fishermen over fishing rights, so she could get quite angry from what I can gather. But there's an extra character here. He was a caller from the, shall we call him, the Victorian set from the cliffs above, the well-to-do. And that was Reginald Templar, a solicitor. So you'll hear a little bit more about him later on. The brutal murder of Miss Keyes took place overnight, 14th, 15th of November, 1884. It was around about 3:30 in the morning that the maid, Eliza, raises the alarm when she smells smoke. She goes downstairs, discovers the body of Miss Keyes, who's been beaten round the back of the head. She says that John Lee was already there and had bloodstains on his shirt. John Lee reckons he was fast asleep in bed when the maid wakes him up. Everybody now is awake. The place is on fire. Miss Keyes is dead. John Lee goes outside, smashes one of the dining room windows, cutting his hand in the process. He says to let the smoke out. He then runs over to the Carry Arms, the local pub, where the landlord is woken up, and he comes over to lend a hand. They put the fire out, but the landlord asks for a hatchet to help chop some of the smouldering wood away from the beams. The hatchet is lifted out of the wood pile, and it is found to be covered in blood. The police will match the hatchet to the wounds later on. What John Lee does now is he goes and raises the alarm with the police. The next morning, the police search the property. In a drawer near to where John Lee slept, they found a razor-sharp knife. Miss Keyes was found to have had her throat slit so deep she'd almost been decapitated. Also, near to where John Lee slept, an empty paraffin can was found. 3 fires had been set in the dining room, including one near the body of Miss Keyes. The police surmise it's to burn the evidence. John Lee, being the only man in the house, is arrested. Suspect number 1. Do you know his own sister actually gave a statement to say that he'd threatened Miss Keyes, and he threatened to burn the house down and watch it burn from on top of the cliff. The trial was swift. Now, Reginald Templar, remember that name, was his original defence attorney. But he was ill. He had a mental illness. So he had to withdraw from the trial. But he now pays somebody else to defend John Lee. Now his defence attorney, his new guy, brings up a little subject here. He says Elizabeth, John Lee's half-sister, was pregnant. Who was the lover? Was there another person involved? Because the house was all locked up, so nobody broken in. Was there another person in the house? Well, they ignored that, and John Lee was found guilty and sentenced to death. He will be executed by hanging on the 23rd of February, 1885. Throughout the trial, John Lee had proclaimed his innocence. And just a few days before the execution date, he's visited by a vicar. And John Lee confesses to him that there were 2 other people involved in the murder. And he's advised to make a statement, which he did, which was then sent to the Home Secretary, who refused clemency. John Lee is going to hang. And on the day of the execution, it's all set up, and guess what? Kev has made a model. Here it is. Now, this is what should happen. The excess rope is tied up. There is the condemned man. He will step onto the trap door. The hangman will pull the lever, and he will plunge to his death through the trap doors. That's what's supposed to happen. Let's just do a quick demonstration of that, because I've made the model and I'm quite pleased with it. The original gallows have been moved from place to place. They weren't built purposely just this hanging. But what should have happened is quite straightforward. Now I'm holding the excess rope. I just couldn't quite get it to work. But all I had to do was press the lever to remove the bolt. The trapdoor gives way Job done. That's what should have happened. But what really happened was this. John stands on the trapdoor. The lever is pulled. Nothing happens. He feels the trapdoor give a little bit, but it doesn't go through. The executioner plus a couple of the guards stamp on the trapdoor and it moves a little bit. Can you imagine being John, waiting for that drop? He is then manoeuvred away. From what I understand is he still has the bag over his head. They bring in warders to check it out. They think that this has happened or that's going wrong, so they even shave off a little bit of the trapdoor. John is then brought all the way back on. He stands there and the lever is pulled. Nothing happens. This poor man is taken to the one side again, still with the rope around his neck, for goodness sake. They check it and they try it out. They put a sack of concrete on and it works fine. So they bring the poor man back. Now the third time, pull the lever, nothing happens. The chief constable said it was actually 4 times. Well, 3 or 4 times, let's face it, it's enough for any man, because the medical officer steps in now and he says enough's enough. This man has been through too much. He is taken back to the condemned cell. Can you imagine his state of mind? What are they going to do? They're going to bring me back out? Well, what happens now is the governor of the prison goes to London, meets with the Home Secretary, and his sentence is commuted to life. John Lee would spend the next 22 years in prison. But do you know, he'd always proclaimed his innocence all the way through the trial, all the way through his prison time. He'd even said to John Berry, the executioner, just before the attempted first execution, that he would take the secrets of who was there in his heart to the grave. Well, Reginald Templar, do you remember him? The solicitor, the man who paid for the defense attorney for John Lee. Well, this is the alternative story from John Lee. He says the night of the murder, 4 of them were down in the kitchen. That is his half-sister, Elizabeth, and Reginald Templar, her lover and the father of her unborn child. This is a bit of a scandalous thing going on, because Reginald is up there. He's one of the toffs. Elizabeth is just a common cook. Scandal in the making. Unmarried mother, all of that. Illegitimate child. John Lee, he's also with a young lady downstairs. They're having a few drinks. Bit of a laugh. They wake up. Miss Keyes. She comes down. She is furious at what's going on. She has a blazing row with Reginald. He loses his temper and goes into a rage, a fit. Now don't forget, this guy is unstable. And he hits her several times around the back of the head with a hatchet. He cannot afford, you see, to be found out. He would be ruined. Together now, they move the body upstairs. They set the scene, spread the paraffin around and set fire to their house. That is the alternate story. Well, John Lee though. What if John Lee was actually innocent? Now, don't get me wrong, because he wasn't a good guy. What happened to him in the end? He becomes a minor celebrity. He sells his story for a small fortune. He marries a nurse. They have a child, and then when she's pregnant the second time, he abandons her to the workhouse. He's not actually that nice. And he absconds with his new lover, I believe to the United States of America, and died in 1945 in Milwaukee, in the northern part of the United States. It's a heck of a story. The man they couldn't hang. Now, this video is about the 9th century East Anglian king, or St Edmund. There is so much about this guy, so much legend. There's pictures from the medieval times of him tied to a tree and shot through with arrows. Some say he died in combat. So we're going to have a little look into the legend. There is St Edmund, who became the first patron saint of England. Just doing the research for this subject of St Edmund, King Edmund, was very difficult because on one hand there is very little known about him. On the other hand, there is an awful lot written about him. So my sources are from Asa, the late 9th century Welsh monk and bishop, the Saxon Chronicles, the Winchester Chronicles, which are apparently written before then. And then there's a book by the Reverend McKinley. So I've used all of those as resources, as well as, surfing the net as you do. But before you begin this subject, you've got to look at England, 9th century. Then go back before then. Imagine you're a Briton and the Romans are your masters. Things have been going quite well. The Roman Empire has settled, and then all of a sudden they've got to go. Well, you don't have a Briton army. It's gone. Long in history, it's gone. The Romans go, you are so vulnerable. And that's when Vortigern, who was a king down in what we now know Kent, invited over Hengist and I think his brother to bring some of their Saxon army over to help protect them about marauding Picts. Now that's actually wrong. When I said the Saxon army, it's wrong. They were the Jutes, and they're from a part of the world called Jutland, which is in modern day Denmark. And when they come over, yeah, they're going to do a bit of fighting for us. But let's face it, England, especially down in what they call the Garden of England, Kent in the south there, it's beautiful farmland. It really is. So if you see who actually did invade, because the Saxons, the Angles and the Jutes, who made up the Anglo-Saxons and the English, were invaders, and they were ruthless. And they settle. The poor old Britons were pushed off to the west because the Saxons pushed them away, settled the land, and they made a success of it. And that's the problem, because then you have other invaders coming, don't you? The Vikings. You can look at the first raid on Lindisfarne, where they struck down monks, just killed them as they were tending their fields, took away only the young, murdered everybody else. They didn't care, and they tore the covers off Bibles, holy books, because they got jewels on them. This is what they were. They were after treasure, they were after slaves. But this is recorded, how they slit the throats of children and just threw them by the side of the path, how they struck down men of all ages and captured women to take away as slaves and sell them on the slave markets in Northern Europe. These Vikings, they were barbarians. They were barbaric, vicious killers, to the point that they eventually depopulated parts of England, East Anglia particularly. So we're going to put up a map to show you the different parts, because it's interesting. Some of the parts of England, East Anglia, that's the Eastern Angles, Wessex, the West Saxons, Sussex, the Southern Saxons, yeah? So you have this whole carved up parts of England which still bear the name for the Saxons. So it's quite a complicated picture, and right in the middle of it, 9th century, we end up with a new king right over on the east there in East Anglia, and he is the very, very young King Edmund. We have a description of King Edmund. He was tall, well proportioned, deep blue eyes, handsome, but he had a great big nose. I love these little touches, do you? He was not English. He was born in the old homeland of the Saxons, northern Germany, just north of Hamburg, 841 AD. That's when he was born. He wasn't the natural heir to the little kingdom of East Anglia. Ethelweard had died. He hadn't an heir. So the elders look around. They go back to the old country looking for an heir, and they have a distant cousin, Edmund. So he becomes King Edmund. He was very young, and it wasn't a straightforward transition. It was a little bit rocky at first. But what they notice about this young man is how honourable he was, how fair, also a devout Christian. So you have this guy now on this eastern part of England. He's quite a guy. Everybody likes him. And if there's an encroachment onto his land, he will fight them. He is not a coward. He's not faint-hearted, but he is fair. And this is the thing that flows through the whole story of King Edmund, who became St Edmund. And don't forget, he was that patron saint of England. So way back in the 9th century there, they had a problem. Viking raiders, Danes, Vikings, call them what you will. It was these long ships. I've got a model here. This is incomplete. It's all part of something I'm working on in the future. But these long ships with their oars and their sails, they could, yes, get across what they called the German Sea. We call it the North Sea now. But they could even row up rivers. And as the eastern side of England was peppered with these great big rivers that went all the way inland, these men could raid deep into your kingdoms. And this is what's going to be such a major problem for East Anglia, and indeed the rest of England. You see, our story of Edmund continues with a lone boat, a fishing smack really, washed up on the shores of East Anglia. And on board there was Lothpark, a Danish chieftain. He'd been out hunting, he'd been out on his boat, and he got washed out to sea. He turned up cold and hungry on the shores of East Anglia. He was taken to see King Edmund. King Edmund straight away treats him nice, treats him fairly. He stays on. He doesn't go straight home. He stays on. He likes hunting, he likes sport, and eventually he is given to hunting with King Edmund's own hunt master, Bjorn, I think was his name. And off they go together, but Bjorn gets very jealous of the prowess of Lothpark, how he can hunt, and he murders him, stabs him in the back. And there is kind of a legend within the story, because he doesn't come back, but his hunting hound does. It's hungry, then it runs away. And everybody's a bit confused with this. Then the dog doesn't come back. So after a few days, they go looking for the dog, who is howling near the dead body of his master, who has been stabbed in the back. Well, Bjorn was the last person to see him alive. He's the likely candidate. He's put on trial. They reckon he's guilty, but they're going to leave it to God's judgment. They're going to cast him adrift in Lothpark's boat. Bjorn, the hunter and the gamekeeper, is set adrift in Lothpark's boat, and he's going to drift on the same line, but back to Denmark. Now, when Bjorn gets washed up, he's taken by the Danes, and they go to see the sons of Lothpark. But Bjorn doesn't tell them the truth. Well, they want to know, what are you doing in our dad's boat, basically? And he says, well, what happened was this Danish prince, Lothpark, he gets washed up and he is taken to the king, Edmund, who tricks him, brings him in, and then has him tortured as a spy, and they eventually execute him. It was terrible what they did. Straight away, the sons of Lothpark are absolutely furious. They are going to get some revenge. They are going to invade. So, the sons of Lothpark, they're going to invade. They're going to get revenge. Now, there are different accounts of this. I'm going with the one I like the most. They invade, but they bring the hunter, Bjorn, with them. He knows East Anglia. He can come in down through the rivers. He can spy for them. He knows the best ways in. But they're beaten back several times by King Edmund. This guy, he doesn't stand idly. He will fight. And they meet, finally, 869 at Thetford. And there is a heck of a battle. The battle going on for hours upon hours and then stopping at the evening time. The Vikings retreat into their camp, and King Edmund stands there amongst the dead and the dying, and he's horrified. He can see what's happening. His country, East Anglia, is being ravaged. He doesn't like it, so he withdraws. Then an offer is sent to him by the sons of Lothpark. If you pay homage to us, you can keep your kingdom. And he had to consider this because he was vastly outnumbered by the Danes and the Viking army now. But the one thing that sticks is he's got to give up Christianity, go back to the old gods. And he's unwilling to do that. And it's a problem. But he puts his people first. He will surrender. But he doesn't surrender alone. He has a holy man with him, Bishop Humbert. So together they hand themselves over to the brothers. And negotiations begin. But the sticking point is this. King Edmund will not recount. He will not give up his Christian faith. And that's the big sticking point. So straight away, they kill the bishop with a sword. Single stroke, he's dead. And King Edmund is tortured. He's tied to a pillar in the church and he is whipped and flayed, but he will not recant. In the end, the brothers, they get fed up of this guy, give him to the archers, use him for target practice, help yourselves. And they shoot him, but being bowmen, they know where to shoot. Shoot him in the legs, shoot him in the arms. Don't shoot him through the heart or through the stomach. And they keep him alive for quite some time. And in the end, the brothers, they simply behead him. The head is hacked off, the body is thrown to one side in a pit, and the head, under the advice of Bjorn the Hunter, is thrown in a thicket so nobody can find it. Eventually, the Danes withdraw, and local Christians, they find the body of their king, but they can't find the head. It's about a year they try to find the head of their king, and they do a search of the area looking in the thickets for the head, and they're calling to each other. I'm over here. Yeah, I'm over here. I still can't find it. And then they realise that there's an extra voice calling out, I'm here. And they're all looking at each other. You can imagine the scene, can't you? Was that you, Bert? No, it wasn't me. Was that you, Jim? No, it wasn't me. And they go towards the voice. I'm here. I'm here. And eventually they find the head, which hasn't decomposed, of King Edmund. I'm here, it called out. So the legend is born. He was simply known as King Edmund. He wasn't anything special, brave guy, good guy and all that. But it was the Danes in 890 AD. They minted some commemorative coins. And on it talks about, or it marks, the St Edmund. So it was his enemy who actually promoted Edmund as a saint. There are miracles that happen and are attributed to St Edmund. He becomes the patron saint of England until Edward III, who dismisses him as our saint, and we have St George. St George! And it doesn't finish there. In recent history, I think in 2006, the newspaper and the BBC over in Suffolk, they petitioned the government to have St Edmund reinstated as the true patron saint of England, because Edmund was English. Well, actually he wasn't, was he? Because he's from Germany. Yeah. So they fail. And so he is instated as the patron saint of Suffolk. And I love that, because that was his home. It was the place, East Anglia, that he actually fought for. And just a little note there. You might see I have a badge on my cap. I have been a member of a little guild of archers for a few decades now. And we are known as the Guild of St Edmund. He is our patron saint.
Now, this video takes us across to medieval France, to the reign of Charles VI, and to a real tragic, unfortunate incident. It was called the Ball of the Burning Men, Bal des Ardentes, or, if you wish, the Bal des Sauvages, the Ball of the Wild Men. But before we go into this tragic incident, let's have a little look at the bit of the background of what was going on in medieval France at this time. In 1380, tragedy strikes France when the king dies. That's Charles V. Now, his 12-year-old son becomes Charles VI, but he's too young to actually reign as king. So, 4 uncles step in and become the regents of France. However, 2 of the uncles couldn't be bothered. They don't want anything to do with the politics. And one of the uncles, Louis of Anjou, is nothing more than a thief, a liar, because he makes off with the treasury of the crown. Now, this leaves Philip of Burgundy as the sole regent of France. That's an incredible position to hold in France. Very, very powerful. Now, just 5 years later, 1385, the young king marries his queen, but she's a foreigner, Isabeau of Bavaria. She is not a popular figure when it comes to being the Queen of France. The people themselves, they don't like her. So it was only 2 years after marrying Isabeau, 1387, that Charles dismisses his uncles as regents. But what he does next is very interesting because he reinstates the marmozet. These were his father's councillors. And these guys are really good because they want less taxation, peace with England, and a strong central government. This actually leads to a 3-year truce with England. And this is a great way politically, isn't it? To please the people. Peace, less taxation, strong central government. So all's going well with our Charles VI, King of France. But it all falls apart with an attempted assassination upon the Constable of France, who happens to be the head of his advisors, the marmozet. The king believes that it's actually an attack upon his own person, and they find out that it was orchestrated by John, the 4th Duke of Brittany. So the king, in his rage, decides he will have a campaign against Brittany. He will organise a retaliatory attack. But on a hot August morning near Le Mans, the king is on his horse and all of a sudden draws his sword and he screams, "Forward against the traitors!" And he charges into his own men and he attacks them. He kills 4 of them. Even his own brother was almost injured. The king is then grabbed by his chamberlain, who grabs him round the waist and wrestles him to the floor. He's raging, this king, and then all of a sudden he falls unconscious. Falls into a coma which lasts for 4 days. 2 of his uncles, the Duke of Burgundy and the Duke of Berry, seize control as regents of the crown. They dismiss the marmozet councillors. This means no low taxation, no central government, and of course, no peace with England. Can you imagine the shock everybody must have been in? 1 minute they're going on campaign, the next minute their king has killed 4 of their own men, important people too, and is in a coma. Well, they managed to get him back to Le Mans. And there was a physician, 92 years of age apparently, but really well respected, Guillaume de Arseny, and he treats the king. And by stages, they get him back to Paris. And when I say by stages, they go from castle, rest, castle, rest, castle, and then eventually on to Paris. The poor king is going to be afflicted by these attacks for the rest of his life. They believed at the time that it was divine retribution and punishment, others that the king had been bewitched. But modern physicians, they reckon it was paranoid schizophrenia. And the king himself will deteriorate. He, at one stage, believes apparently that he's made of glass. I was reading how a pope described how the king had iron rods sewn into his clothes, just in case anybody banged into him, he wouldn't break. Others record that the king would run, raging, down the corridors of his palace. And at times he would not recognise Isabeau, his wife, and demanded that this strange woman be removed from his company. They implored Guillaume de Arseny, this 92-year-old physician, to stay with the court of France. They offered him riches, but he wasn't interested. He didn't want to be there. But before he left, he gave instructions on how to treat the king. And I've got it here, some of his original words. He ordered the courtiers to shield Charles from the duty of government and leadership. Burden him with work as little as you can. Pleasure and forgetfulness will be better for him than anything else. So once Guillaume had left, the court went to town with keeping the king calm, entertained. The ladies had such extravagant fashions. Their dresses were made wider, covered in jewels, and they also styled their hair like seashells. So whenever the king saw them, they would wow him. This was so extravagant because they had to widen the doorways of the palace so that these ladies could pass through. And they had entertainments for the king, extravagant balls. But of course, you've got to go one better each time you have a form of amusement. Otherwise, you're just repeating yourself. And this is what led to the Ball of the Burning Men. On the 28th of January 1393, a masquerade, a masked ball, was held in honour of the Queen's lady-in-waiting because she was getting married for the third time. She'd had a bit of bad luck. Now, this masquerade was organised to be quite outlandish. There were going to be 6 men. They're going to be dressed from head to toe as the wild men of the woods, the savages of the woods. Now, their costume was actually sewn onto them, and it was a linen base soaked in pitch with little bits of flax and linen sewn to them, so they actually looked like these hairy, ragged men, the wild men of the woods. Now, the problem with this was these costumes were highly flammable. So no naked flames were allowed anywhere near these 6 men. And they will dance around at this masquerade, abusing people, spitting at them, being like the savages. It was going to be one of those occasions where it was almost out of control. But what the people didn't realise is one of the masked men was actually the king. And people, their job was to try and guess who was behind the masks. So the stage is set. The men are dancing, people are laughing, the obscenities are being thrown. It's quite outlandish when a late comer to the ball, the Duke of Orleans, the king's brother, arrives, and things take a turn for the worst. So the Duke of Orleans, the king's brother, has arrived at the ball. He's drunk, all his friends are drunk, and as they enter the ball, what they see is these wild men of the woods dancing around, and it is said that the Duke of Orleans snatches from one of his servants a burning torch and holds it towards the face of one of the dancers trying to identify who it was. A spark drops and ignites the dancer. He is flailing around now, screaming in agony. People are backing off in no time at all. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of the dancers are on fire. One of them runs and dives into a vat of wine to extinguish the flames. But 4 of them now are literally engulfed in flames. One of the witnesses says their genitals burning dropped from their bodies and their blood just burst out, but the king was safe. He's actually rescued. One of the Queen's ladies in waiting, mere 14-year-old girl, recognised the king. She ran and threw her dress over the king to save him from the flames. One of the men died at the scene. 2 of the dancers died a couple of days later, but the guy who organised the ball, he lingered even longer, and it said he cursed the other dancers until his last breath. Sadly, these episodes or these attacks of insanity become more and more frequent with King Charles VI until come the end of the 1390s, his role as King of France is reduced to nothing more than ceremonial. Now, at the same time, his wife, apparently Isabeau, is having an affair with his brother, the Duke of Orleans. And then to make matters even worse, a cousin, the Duke of Burgundy, has the Duke of Orleans assassinated. This will lead to a civil war between the Burgundians and the Armagnacs, which lasted for several decades. Now, the vacuum created by this and the lack of central power and the general irresponsibility of the French court earned them a reputation for lax morals and decadence. Now, this reputation will last for over 200 years. It will come to a sudden and bloody end.
Now, these videos, it's a bit of a dark subject, really. It's about the burial practices of Victorian London, around about the 1830s, 40s to be precise. This focuses on a Baptist minister who managed to bury in excess, they say, of 12,000 bodies in the cellars, the basement of his chapel. So, to Victorian London we shall make. Well, actually, it's just before Queen Victoria come to the throne, 1822. And we're going to Clement's Lane, just off the Strand, where a Mr. W. Howes has founded a ministry and purchased a chapel, the Enon Chapel. This is a financial enterprise because people can worship upstairs and be buried downstairs at a cost, you understand. Before we start the story of the Enon Chapel, we need to lay a little bit of a foundation. The area that the chapel was located was very poor indeed. It was slums, people living on the breadline from hand to mouth. It was absolutely awful. If you'd have seen my film about the victims of the Ripper, it was that kind of an area. Now, if you have children, infant mortality rate was between 30 and 40%. That is incredible and so devastatingly sad. One of your family dies. I've got it written down here. Cost of a funeral for a child, £1, 10 shillings and twopence. That's £102 in modern English money. If an adult dies, that's £1, 17 shillings and twopence. That's £126 in modern English money. This was so bad because a labourer made 3 shillings and 9pence a day. That's the equivalent of £12.70 in modern money. So if he has a death in his family and he lives in a single room, crowded room, 14, 15 people in one room, he's got to save up to have a funeral so the body will be wrapped and stored in that room, under the bed maybe. And then along comes Mr. Howes and the Enon Chapel. He will charge you 15 shillings for a funeral, half the price of the local churches. And what makes this more attractive? No questions asked. Has your child been baptised? What's the cause of death? Nothing like that at all. It's a 15 shilling funeral and it's not in the churchyard. That means the body snatchers can't have it, so your loved one doesn't end up on the dissecting table. No, they're going to be stored, buried, call it what you will, in the cellars underneath the chapel. So you can worship above whilst they slumber on below. It's amazing really when you look into this Enon Chapel, major scandal 1839, and you've got to ask yourself, how do we know so much about it? Well, it starts with the Commissioner of the Sewers, because you see diagonal running through the cellar of the Enon Chapel was an open sewer. There have been complaints all the way round the neighbourhood of the terrible stench coming out of the Enon Chapel. So they naturally assumed it was the sewers. So the commissioner went down, and what does he find? A scene of abject horror. Bodies piled up, coffins piled up, smashed up coffins. And what he suggests to Mr. Howes is that he builds an archway over the sewer, enclosing it, and doesn't do anything else. No repercussions about these bodies all over the place. Even some body parts apparently had floated down the sewer. No, he's allowed to carry on. But what he did do was he dug out part of the sewer, and there were 60 wagon loads of soil that was contaminated with bone, body parts, human tissue. They were dumped the other side of Waterloo Bridge, where they were constructing a new footpath. Some of it, so they say, was dumped straight into the River Thames. However, carelessly, some baskets of this contaminated soil were given to some builders who were repairing a path. And when they emptied out this soil, a human hand appeared. There was an outcry, but still nothing was done. Mr. Howes continued burying 500 people in the cellars of the Enon Chapel every year till his death in 1842. Think about that. What did he do with them? So how on earth did Mr. House manage to bury 500 bodies a year in the cellar of Enon Chapel? Such a confined space, 59 feet by 12 feet. Well, to help us out, I've done a drawing. Let's take a look. So here's my drawing. Well, basically it's a plan of the Enon Chapel cellars. If you think about it, 12 foot wide by 59 feet long and only 6 foot tall. We have an open sewer running through it, which must have been disgusting in its own right. Stacks of coffins from floor to ceiling. And then broken coffin bits waiting to be taken upstairs and be burnt by Mr. Howes and his wife in their house. But then the bone pits, and I'll try and explain this a little bit better. You imagine that is the floor of the chapel. He digs down. He makes these burial pits. He then stacks your bodies one on top of the other, covers them with quicklime and a little bit of soil. Now, what I read, so he's covered them with quicklime, but one of the pits must have contained coffins, because one of the witnesses reckons that as you walked along the surface of the chapel cellars, you were actually walking, there's somebody walking, on coffin lids. But he rotated these. So once he got them to rot down into bones, he would take them up, and then somewhere along here he would stack all of the bones up, even floating them along the sewers and discreetly disposing of them by the wagon load into the River Thames. He had an entire production line going, but the stench from all of these bodies rotting in the coffins, the decomposition in the bone pits, it must have been unbelievable. We actually have a witness to the vault under the Enon Chapel. His name was George Walker, nicknamed George Graveyard Walker. Mr. Walker was actually a surgeon and an advocate of public health. He campaigned tirelessly for better burial practices. Now, he left us a statement, a witness statement of what he saw in the vaults under the Enon Chapel, and I've got part of one here. This is what he said. Vast numbers of bodies have been placed here in pits, dug for the purpose, the uppermost of which were covered only by a few inches of earth. Soon after interments were made, a peculiarly long, narrow black fly was observed to crawl out of many of the coffins. This insect, a product of the putrefaction of the bodies, was observed on the following season to be succeeded by another, which had the appearance of a common bug with wings. The children attending the Sunday school held in this chapel, in which these insects were to be seen crawling and flying in vast numbers, called them body bugs. We have another witness to the state of the Enon Chapel. He was actually a member of the congregation. He was a cabinet maker, and he attended the chapel from 1828 to 1835. Now, he made a statement to a parliamentary committee with regards to what had gone on, and this is a copy of what he said. At the time I attended it, there were interments, and the place was in a very filthy state. The smell was most abominable and very injurious. I have frequently gone home myself with a severe headache, which I suppose to have been occasioned by the smell, more particularly in the summertime. Also, there were insects, something similar to a bug in shape and appearance, only with wings about the size of a small bug. I have seen them in the summertime, hundreds of them flying about the chapel. I have taken them home in my hat, and my wife has taken them home in her clothes. We always considered that they proceeded from the dead bodies underneath. Can you imagine that? In 1842, the Baptist minister, Mr. Howes, dies. So the burials cease. And in 1844, a Mr. Fitzpatrick takes up residence in the Enon Chapel. But he finds that the kitchen ceiling is too low. So he employs a builder on his day off on a Sunday to come and do some alterations in the kitchen. The builder lifts all the flagstones up because he's going to dig down into the floor to make more room in the kitchen. As soon as he lifts up the flagstones, you've guessed it, he finds bones. Well, this is an enterprising builder, and Mr. Fitzpatrick is in on it as well. So they clear all the bones out of the ground and then dig a hole even deeper than the floor level they want for the kitchen. Put all of the bones into there, fill it in, and then lay a new kitchen floor. Job done. Well, it would appear that Mr. Fitzpatrick wasn't that happy with his new kitchen in Enon Chapel after all, because he moved out. But we do know that come 1847, the chapel was acquired by a group of teetotalers who reopened Enon Chapel as a dance hall. And their tagline, you've got to love this, was Dancing on the Dead. Now their handout, their bill, if you like, read, Enon Chapel, Dancing on the Dead. Admission 3p. No lady or gentleman admitted unless wearing shoes and stockings. What a great advert. It's amazing how this ends up, because George Graveyard Walker in 1848 purchased the Enon Chapel and promised to give all of the bodies buried in there a decent burial. But he didn't do it discreetly. He was a bit of a showman. He invited the public in, no charge, but contributions were accepted. They will help for the reinterment of the bodies. To encourage people to come, he had attendants walking up and down the local area with a skull in their hands. That would encourage or entice your death lovers of Victorian London to come and have a look. In fact, 6,000 people came down to Enon Chapel, climbed down into that cellar to view the great pyramid of bones. The highlight of the Enon tour was when the visitors got to gaze upon the shriveled face of the long dead Mr. Howes. His body must have been placed down in the cellar amongst all of those bones. That's what you call poetic justice, isn't it? But all of those remains were reinterred in Norwood Cemetery, and to this very day they lie there still, sadly, in an unmarked grave. Sadly, this is just the tip of the iceberg. The scandal of the Enon Chapel was just one scandal amongst many concerning the private burial places of the City of London. We haven't even touched on the boneyards yet, so stay tuned. There's more to come. Now, what we're going to do is going to take a little journey with medicine through time, focusing on Andreas Vesalius, the 16th century physician who pretty much revolutionized the anatomy of man. So let's have a little look. But actually, before I do, I have a model. I bought a skeleton in a box. It's the greatest jigsaw puzzle I've ever tried to do. So if there's any of you physicians out there and you're looking, oh, that bone's not right, I haven't completed the jigsaw just yet. I've done the spine, the pelvis and the skull. They're all connected. Now, we do know the name of this skeletal remains. His name was Andy, because it's written on the bottom of his foot. Another problem I've got is I've counted all the bones up and I've got an extra one. I think it's a finger bone, but hey, I will discover as we go on. Do you know, it's interesting when you go into these things and you pick up tiny little snippets. One I found was early medieval blade, you know, for surgery, a scalpel. But over the medieval period, going into the Renaissance period, they had better steels, so they could make better incisions, better cuts. And this is very important because of what Vesalius actually did. Also, you have doctors wearing these, don't you? The spectacles, but they're only magnifying glasses, but it enables them to have a better look inside. But that Andreas Vesalius, what a character. So before we even begin on Andreas Vesalius, we've got to go back to ancient times, to AD 129, the birth of the Greek Galen. He becomes one of the most pivotal surgeons, physicians of all times, pretty much. He wrote 60 books, volumes on medicine. It was in AD 162 that he became really famous in Rome. He'd moved there from the provinces where he'd been a physician to the gladiator schools. So he gets lots of practice in setting bones, stitching people up, stab wounds, that kind of thing. One of the most important things about Galen, which I find quite fascinating, was one of the most important principles is observation. And if you go to your own doctor, what's the first thing he does is he looks at you. How are you? How are you feeling? He asks the questions. This is so important. But then Galen kind of strays. There was this belief, which was from before Galen, about the four humours. The body must be in balance. You have blood, phlegm, black bile, yellow bile. If you're too hot, you must take cool precautions. If you're too cold, you must heat up. Got to keep your body in balance. Well, it's obviously over the years that's been disproved. But also, Galen believed in dissection to learn. And that's where his problem was. He used to dissect pigs because being in Rome, it was forbidden. It was illegal to dissect human bodies. So he could perhaps observe bones that had been washed out of a grave, that kind of thing. But he'd have to go across the Mediterranean Sea to Alexandria to observe the dissection of a human body. So this guy who has performed surgery, he's done dissection, he's not 100% there when it comes to the knowledge of what's actually inside the human body. How do the bones actually work? So for 1500 years, nobody questioned it. That is until a young man from Brussels comes along to have a look. Andreas Vesalius, what a lad, born in 1514, Brussels in Belgium. He had such an inquisitive mind, such an interest. At the age of 14, he actually he's enrolled in the University of Louvain. And it's here that he cultivates an absolute fascination with human anatomy. So much so that it's reported that he stole human bodies from gallows where guys were hanging down, you know, those people who've been executed and were rotting away. He steals their parts. Kevin's world now, right? You imagine this then. You're a young lad, 14, 15 years of age. The castle gates or the town gates close about 11 o'clock, so you nip out at 10:30, and you look up and you see various rotting corpses. When the town guards aren't looking, you jump up, hang on a leg, pull it down, shove it under your coat, and nonchalantly walk back into town just in time for the town gates to close. You then take the body part home. We've got a left leg, let's say. When you get it home, you lay it out, dissect it, boil it so you've got the bones. Put the bones together. You've got a left leg. Next day, you've got a right leg. And you might have half a spine, or you might have the whole torso, or a left arm and a right arm, until eventually he assembles a skeleton. This is his first time he does this. And it's quite interesting because he then diverts a little bit, and it's the influence of his father. He ends up in Paris. He's aged 19 at the university there, and he's studying military science. But it's there that he really does develop his interest in anatomy. And in 1536, he has to leave Paris and return to the University of Louvain because war had broken out. So he needs to leave. Now, Andreas was only 23, 24 when he graduated from the University at Louvain, and he was immediately given the post of Chair of Surgery and Anatomy at Padua in Italy. Now, at this time, it was still frowned upon in parts for you to perform dissections of human bodies. But in Padua there, one of the judges of the criminal courts, 1539 I believe it was, gave the bodies of executed criminals to Andreas Vesalius so he could continue his work. And this made him very popular with his students because he could do the dissections. And he had 4 woodcuts made of images of his dissections, which were so popular with his students. But he found they were being copied. So he had them put into a book. He published them. It was about this time that Vesalius began to question some of Galen's work, some of Galen's theories. No, nobody does it. 1500 years, it's gospel. Well, Andreas Vesalius questions Galen's theory on how the heart works. And it just how it happens, I've actually got a heart here. It's not a real heart. I tried to get one for you, but it doesn't matter how long you queue up outside accidents and emergency in the hospitals, they won't actually let you have a human heart. This, believe it or not, is a child's model. And this is a bit of a reflection, because I purchased this afternoon from a model shop. The whole thing comes apart. Well, it should do, but I think the painters actually draw. Oh, there you go. It all comes apart. So think about this. We're going back almost 500 years. They are just starting to discover how the heart works. Nowadays, those 500 years later, a child can have a model and it gives you the complete workings and instructions and then diagrams of how this organ works. Isn't that fantastic? But way back then, Galen believed one side of the heart, the left side, the left ventricle, pumped blood straight up, or supplied blood straight up to the brain. The other side, the right ventricle, it fed blood down into the lesser organs, the stomach. And he believed that blood passed from the left to the right by tiny holes that went through, the center of the heart. And Vesalius said he couldn't find this. He couldn't find any holes whatsoever. There has to be another theory, but he could not prove his own theory about the heart. It was William Harvey, who a little bit later on, he will discover exactly how the heart and circulation works. That's going to be the subject of another video. Quite something to have a look at. Now, another thing that Vesalius disagreed with Galen was the business of the bones. Andreas had learnt that Galen had been dissecting pigs all those years ago, and he questioned one simple thing. Galen said that the lower jaw, the mandible, I understand, was in two parts. Well, in some animals it is, but in a human being it's not. It's one complete piece. So now he's going to be unpopular, because he's going against the gospel of Galen. So it's in 1543 that Andreas performs his first public dissection of a human corpse in Basel in Switzerland. Jakob Karrer. He was an executed criminal, and Vesalius does the full dissection of the body with an audience of the public. Now, I've had a look at a description of what these affairs were like. So it's dark. The theatre around, the tiers of seats, they're lit by candles, so there's candlelight flickering. At the head and at the feet of the corpse is a large flaming torch. There were rowdy affairs. People were having a wonderful time, and then students would argue between themselves. So it wasn't a case of everybody's been very quiet to watch this solemn occasion while they cut this bloke to pieces. No, it was a night out. I remember my autopsies. We were very solemn and we were very caring too. At the end of the day, it was somebody's body. But Vesalius stays in Basel to help in the publication of his 7 volumes of the De Humani Corporis Fabrica. It means on the fabric of the human body. 7 volumes filled with illustrations, and the skill of the Swiss printers. Wow, this book still to this day is absolutely fantastic. You know, it's amazing that Andreas finds time to marry, and he has a daughter, which is quite lovely. He eventually becomes the imperial physician to Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor. He wrote many books while he was in that service, but he was not popular. He was investigated several times on religious grounds, and other surgeons actually referred to him as nothing more than a barber surgeon. And he was cleared of all charges, but he did have one major antagonist, And he was at one time had been a professor at one of the universities, Jacobus Silvus, and he counterclaimed against Vesalius by writing a theory or a thesis that since Galen's time, the human body had developed differently to when Galen actually studied it. Of course, it's nonsense, but it just goes to show how much against Andreas Vesalius many people were. So in 1555, he moves to Spain. So in Spain, he becomes the physician to Philip II, and he has time to revise his book, The Fabric of the Human Body. It's quite something when you look at this man, Andreas Vesalius, because it wasn't just the jawbone. It wasn't, going against Galen. He figured out other things like how the colon system worked. Lots of parts of the body. He was starting to put the whole thing together as a whole. But rumours are that he fell foul of the Inquisition. One of the rumours was that they sentenced him to death for doing a dissection on a living human being, somebody whose heart was still beating. But the King of Spain had this commuted to going on a pilgrimage to the Holy Land. And this is the sad thing, because in 1564 he was actually shipwrecked and ended up on the island of Zante destitute, where he died and was buried by a local dignitary because poor Andreas had no money. Modern day theories are that the Inquisition connection is nonsense, that Andreas Vesalius was simply escaping from the drudge of life with the Spanish court. So to sum up the legacy of Andreas Vesalius, he was the father of anatomy. He revolutionized our knowledge of anatomy, and after almost 500 years, his work still to this day is most certainly relevant. Hi, or should I say, Ohayo gozaimasu. This film is about the atomic bombing of both Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan, August 1945. But included in our film is the story of Tsutomu Yamaguchi, a Japanese gentleman who actually survived both the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. An incredible story indeed. What inspired me to make this little film was a conversation I had at a family barbecue with regards to the Russian invasion of the Ukraine, and we were having a good old chat about this. And then a question was put directly to me, what would happen if the Russians dropped a nuclear bomb on the Ukraine? The debate that followed was quite intense, but I very quickly realised that most of the people who were talking had no idea what a nuclear bomb really was and the devastation it could cause. So I've been doing a little bit of research, and one or two of the things that have popped up have surprised me. So the bombing raid on Hiroshima, August the 6th, 1945. The bomb was released 8:15 a.m. rush hour, and it explodes 2,000 feet above Hiroshima. That's an airburst. Now this bomb itself, little boy, was 10 foot long. Imagine the size of that for a bomb. 10 foot long, 30 inches across. Its power, it contained 15 kilotons of TNT, and it will destroy 4 square miles of the city of Hiroshima. The actual target on Hiroshima was the Ioi Bridge, but they missed by about 800 feet and the bomb exploded above the Shima Medical Clinic. They say anything up to 80,000 people were burned alive, incinerated straight away. And the numbers fluctuate as to how many people died afterwards from sickness and their injuries. I've read one account that it was another 80,000. Now, for 80,000 people to die in Hiroshima, just like that, that was 30% of the population. And you imagine the disruption. No fire brigade, no medical help. Nobody had ever dropped an atomic bomb before. Nobody knew about radiation sickness. But this was just the beginning. So the Americans launched a second raid and dropped a nuclear bomb on August the 9th on the city of Nagasaki. The bomb was called Fat Man, that was the nickname, referring allegedly to Winston Churchill. But this bomb contained 21 kilotons of TNT. Now, when it exploded, it instantly killed 40,000 people in Nagasaki, half the amount of those in Hiroshima. Apparently the reason was that Nagasaki had an awful lot of rivers and water surrounding it and also within it. But 40,000 dead, instant. It's devastating. Now, as many of you probably know, the reason the United States dropped the nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki was to bring the Second World War to a speedy end. Now, the decision to drop the second bomb, the bomb that landed on Nagasaki, was taken on the 7th of August. And the reason behind the second bomb was to send a message to the Japanese. We've got lots of these bombs. If need, we will bomb Japan out of existence. But there's another reason. He sent a big message to the Soviet Union. Hey, look what we've got. Now, once the message had sunk in, Emperor Hirohito announced the surrender of the Japanese, unconditional surrender, on the 15th of August. And on the 2nd of September, the surrender documents were signed in Tokyo Bay on board USS Missouri. Presiding over this surrender ceremony on the USS Missouri was General MacArthur. And he made quite a fantastic speech. And the closing words to that speech are, "Let us pray that peace be now restored to the world and that God will preserve it always. These proceedings are closed." Can you imagine being a crew member on Enola Gay on that fateful day when they dropped that bomb on Hiroshima? Do you know they didn't feel the blast until they'd been flying over 11 miles away from the scene? And when they looked back and they saw that mushroom cloud and the area of devastation, in fact, the co-pilot, Captain Robert Lewis, he said, "Oh my God, what have we done?" But that's a kind of a popular picture, isn't it? The Enola Gay is flying away and there might be another aeroplane filming it. Well, in fact, it was 6 aircraft. You got Enola Gay, the camera plane, the observation plane, and 3 weather reconnaissance planes, as well as a 7th, which was actually on the ground at Iwo Jima, which was the reserve interceptor, the reserve bomber in case Enola Gay broke down. But it's interesting that as they approached the Japanese mainland, they were picked up by Japanese radar and sirens were sounded. But the civil population, bless them, were just so fed up of raid after raid, they basically ignored the warnings. Little did they know what was about to happen. Incredibly, it's said that 100 people at least survived both nuclear blasts, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. However, only one person was officially recognized after the war by the Japanese government. Tsutomu Yamaguchi, 29 years of age, an engineer for Mitsubishi Heavy Industries. He designed oil tankers. Now, he was on a 3-month secondment to Hiroshima from Nagasaki. And on the last day, first thing in the morning, he's making his way to the railway station with his 2 friends. Now I'm going to read their names. It's important I get these right. His 2 friends, Akira Iwanaga and Kiyoshi Saito. As they go into the railway station, Yamaguchi realizes, "Oh my goodness, I've left my travel warrant behind." So he runs back to the hotel. His 2 friends continue on. He gets his travel warrant, and as he steps out of the hotel, just before 8:15 on that terrible morning, he sees an aircraft. Not unusual. But then he notices what he thinks are 2 parachutes coming down. And then a blinding flash. He was over 3 kilometers from ground zero. And yet he lost his sight temporarily. His eardrums were burst and his upper torso was actually burned. But he did manage to find his way down into a shelter where he was reunited with his colleagues. The next morning, I presume his sight has recovered. They were there to witness the sheer devastation of Hiroshima. But ironically, they were also able to return to Nagasaki. So, Yamaguchi and his friends have returned home to Nagasaki. Come 9th of August, he is back at work, bandaged up, beaten, but still working. He's in fact having a meeting with his boss, and his boss is incredulous. He does not believe Yamaguchi about his experiences at Hiroshima with the bomb. He says, "You're a scientist, you shouldn't believe in such fantasies." And then at 11:08 a.m., there is an air raid warning, and they all begin to make their way out of the building down into the air raid shelter, and there is a blinding flash. It is, of course, the second nuclear explosion. Yamaguchi survives, almost unscathed. He was once again 3 kilometers from ground zero, but this time it would appear the building shielded him somewhat. Interestingly, Yamaguchi hardly spoke about his experiences at Hiroshima and Nagasaki until he was in his 80s. He wrote a book of poems called A Raft of Corpses, and then people realized that he'd been in both of the explosions. He was a staunch supporter of nuclear disarmament, and I'm hardly surprised at that. He appeared at film premieres about the subject and gave talks on his experiences. He lived until 2010. He was 93 when he died of stomach cancer. His wife had also lived a long life. She died when she was 88. But interestingly, his daughter said he only registered as a survivor of the Nagasaki bombing. He felt that registering for both, it would have been disrespectful to those who were not so fortunate. What an honourable man he must have been. It's amazing when you look at the nuclear bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They were incredible, terribly destructive, but they pale into insignificance when you compare them with today's nuclear weapons that we have. If you look at Little Boy dropped on Hiroshima, that was 15 kilotons of TNT. Fat Man on Nagasaki, 21 kilotons of explosives. But then compare it to today. The United States, submarine-launched Trident. That missile contains 455 kilotons of TNT. And then a Soviet-launched missile, 800 kilotons of explosive. You know, even a 100 kiloton nuclear weapon dropped on New York City, heaven forbid, could lead easily to over 500,000 deaths instantly. Well, I hope you enjoyed that little compilation of some of our videos there. If you did, like, share and subscribe. And if you'd like to support the channel further, you could have a look at our Patreon community. It's going quite well. The link is in the description. But before I go, I'd like to give a shout out to some of our earliest Patreon members. Ian Tucker, Nicholas Redfern and PG Guillaume. Hey guys, thanks a million. Bye for now.